global. Leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Ring Rees Mogg. Put your calls to Jacob Rees-Mogg now. 0345 6060 973. This is LBC.
Morning to you, 3 minutes after 9 on Monday, March the 18th. And if some of this morning's headlines makes you feel like you're in Groundhog Day, you might well be right. May begins a make-or-break bid to get DUP to back deal is one. May woos Brexiteers but still faces defeat is another. As we enter a crucial and make-or-break, whatever it might be, week, I'll take your views and indeed your questions to Conservative MP and, of course, Chair of the all-important ERG, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and, I should say, my LBC colleague as well, who's in the studio with me. Good to see you, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Mr. Ferrari.
Well, it's good to have you, sir. Which way are you inclined to vote at the moment?
I'm waiting to see what the DUP will do. The deal is still a very bad deal. It doesn't deliver on the promises of the Conservative Party manifesto, and it doesn't deliver on the referendum result in full. The question people like me will ultimately have to answer is, can we get to no deal instead? If we can get to no deal instead, that is a better option. It means that we will have left and that we will have restored our nation's independence. But I'm concerned that the Prime Minister, in spite of her previous commitments, is determined to stop no deal, that she has come to the conclusion that it's either her deal or some form of remaining. I think a 2-year extension is basically remaining in the European Union. So those are the considerations people have to think through. But if we can get to no deal, that would be the best option.
And how do you see that? How would that course be charted?
Well, no deal is the law. So the Prime Minister, to do anything other than that, would need to get the agreement of the European Union for an extension and then for Parliament to accept that extension. Now, there are two versions that the Prime Minister could come back with. One would be a long extension, which is basically not leaving, and the other would be a short extension if she'd got her deal through. So that then requires a statutory instrument to be passed, which, if you look at the numbers in the House of Commons last week, would be relatively straightforward.
So no deal is better than a bad deal?
No deal is better than a bad deal, but a bad deal is better than remaining in the European Union, in the hierarchy of deals.
Isn't that what some say is almost Mrs May's tactic now, which is, this is your Brexit, Mr Rees-Mogg, or you're never going to get it?
Well, that's right. That the tactic seems to be to threaten people on either side. So say to people like me, well, if you don't vote for my bad deal, you'll never leave. And to people who are Remainers, if you don't vote for my bad deal, we'll leave without any deal. I think that last bit has gone. I think the Prime Minister is no longer saying that because she personally is determined not to leave without a deal, and the Chancellor has said the same. How they managed to stand on a manifesto that said no deal is better than a bad deal, I do not know. That the Humpty Dumpty approach to the English language, words meaning what they choose them to mean, is something that is of grave concern, because what you saw last week in the House of Commons was an extraordinary divergence, disconnection between our elected representatives and the British people. The British people voted to leave, and by 2/3 to 1/3, the House of Commons voted to obstruct leaving. And that's something that we should be concerned about, because that is not good for the body politic.
Although they would argue it's democracy.
Well, the democracy surely was the referendum and what people said in their manifestos. I don't think it's particularly democratic to break your manifesto pledges. And both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party said that they would respect the referendum result. And now they've said that they want a postponement.
And lastly, before we go to the calls, why is the DUP so key, would you say? Why might that carry your vote?
Well, ultimately, the United Kingdom is more important to me than the European Union. And so if the DUP felt that the United Kingdom were being divided up in the deal, then that would mean it was impossible to vote for the deal under any circumstances. The one thing that would have changed my mind in 2016 was had I believed the scare stories that Scotland would leave the United Kingdom if we voted to leave. I didn't think it was true, and therefore I was happy to vote to leave. But the United Kingdom is my country, and I don't want to see my country chopped up. So the DUP's position is very significant.
Let's go to some calls. Mark is in Palmer's Green. Mark, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Top of the morning to you and bottom mane, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mark.
Your question of Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg, I'm a Brexiteer through and through. If you said to me, Mark, you have two options. You have to choose option one, Mrs May's treaty, which I now call Remain minus minus minus, like the Canada plus plus plus. So Remain minus minus minus, or Remain as we are. I would choose Remain as we are. That's how bad it is. If it comes back, Mr Jacob Rees-Mogg, how are you going to vote?
How I'm going to vote, I haven't yet decided, because it's not quite clear what the choices are going to be. My choice remains leaving without a deal, and if we can get to that, I will vote against Mrs May's deal again, and I will support the DUP. I do, however, disagree with you on the choice that you're proposing. Mrs May's deal, however bad it is, means that we are legally outside the European Union, and that therefore if anyone wanted to take us back in, we would have to go through the legal mechanism of rejoining. And that her deal, again, however bad it is, would mean that we were then in an entirely different relationship with the European Union, which was a political one rather than a legal one, and that there is a body of international law, but there's no court that can enforce its judgments. It's a matter of discussion, negotiation, and of interests. It's not like UK domestic law that can go before a court and then be enforced. It's a different, more political, diplomatic concept than a straight legal concept, and being out, therefore, gives you much, much greater flexibility. And being legally out means that you could then make it considerably better. You're simply not getting all that you want at once. So if the choice were the flat choice you're offering, then I think Mrs May's deal, because it's legally out, is better. And if we remain, we will never leave. Because if you look at what has happened, we had this extraordinary vote to leave against expectations, and then a general election when both parties backed leaving. And still, the people who lost are doing everything they can to stop us leaving and overturn that democratic mandate. We have got as close to leaving as we will ever get under these circumstances. If it's thwarted now, no one's ever going to allow us another chance to have a vote. The whole weight of British establishment opinion will prevent that ever happening again.
Doesn't that indicate you're minded to vote for this deal then, Mr Rees Mogg, if I take your last few words there?
I haven't made up my mind. I genuinely haven't made up my mind. But as I said, there is a hierarchy. That no deal is better than Mrs May's deal, but Mrs May's deal is better than remaining in the European Union. You're talking about being thwarted.
It is this idea that it's effectively now or never, potentially.
Oh, I don't think we will get another chance to leave the European Union. I think the people who are saying, well, let's delay for 2 years and we'll get something better...
You've always said delay is denial.
...are hopelessly, absolutely, delay is denial. And the thought that over 2 years you get something different or better is hopelessly optimistic. It allows all the people who never wanted us to leave to take control of the process in the House of Commons. The Conservatives will be punished by the voters for failing to deliver a leave vote, makes it more likely you get another government in, and that other government could revoke Article 50, as we know from the European Court's judgment.
Mark, quick response to you before I move on.
Well, I don't pretend to understand the complexities and the detail of all of this. But the person I listen to most, the person whose opinion on the subject of Brexit is most important to me, is of course Mr Nigel Farage. And he says, never mind all the backstop malarkey, Mrs May's treaty is just awful. It really is an almighty stinker that we should never, ever sign up to. I think we should just carry on fighting, and if Mr Orban and Mr Salvini are listening at the moment,
I doubt it, but
please set us free and veto an extension of Article 50.
Okay, they won't. I mean, without being indiscreet, I've spoken to ambassadors from various countries. There is no hope of us getting a veto to stop an extension. We may get an extension with very unattractive terms, but they're not going to spend their political capital in the European Union to the benefit of a country that is planning to leave, because they've got their rows with the EU. They need their political capital for their own battles. They're not going to just volunteer to waste it on helping the UK, making them enormously unpopular with the other remaining member states. That is, I'm sorry to say, I wish that were true, but it's wishful thinking.
Mark, thank you. Before I go to the next call, you talk about, you've laid out very candidly where you feel about the possible vote. How many of the ERG do you think you take with you in that stance?
But I haven't said that I'm moving.
No, because what it would take.
Well, no, I don't think there would be much change if the DUP don't change.
No, but if they to indicate that this is a deal with which they could put,
up with which they could put, and that there were various commitments. I think it's not just the DUP. There are commitments on who the Prime Minister's negotiating team would be in the second stage. There would be questions as to what the wage bill would say. It's still a long way from bringing people over to get this deal through.
But how many of your colleagues see it the way you see it, which is it's better than Brexit delayed, which equals Brexit denied, and given the caveats you very carefully outlined, could find themselves possibly getting on the ladder down?
I think many people think that this Brexit is better than a Brexit denied, but that they think that we can still get to no deal. So as long as people think we can still get to no deal, they will vote the deal down, and that's my position too. So the debate is really, is no deal still realistic?
Lloyd's in Lewisham. Lloyd, you're on the radio. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hello, sir.
Good morning.
Mr. Mogg, you have voted against the second referendum, even though you mentioned that you were minded to have one in the past. You have voted for Brexit and voted against the PM's Brexit. So my question is it hypocritical of you to do that? And why is it that you now avail yourself of multiple votes and possible future votes on Macy or not, but yet I, as an ordinary citizen of this country, am not allowed to have a second vote, whether I've changed my mind or not?
Well, first of all, you're not an ordinary citizen, because there's no such thing as an ordinary citizen. Every British citizen is an exceptional person, and you prove that by coming on LBC, as many other people do. I think it's very condescending to look on people as being ordinary. It's a sort of unpleasant politician's habit. So, having explained...
You and your colleagues have a bit more clout at the moment than perhaps we do.
I never have more clout than my constituents. They are my employers, and I have a duty to my employers. First of all, I'm afraid you're confused on the issue of the second referendum and my view, which we've discussed on this programme before. What I was saying was that David Cameron should have got a mandate referendum before he went to negotiate. He decided not to do that. He decided just to have the one referendum and say this is the final referendum. That result has to be delivered upon. That, yes, of course, decisions can be changed, but you would need a general election with a party campaigning for a new referendum to give it legitimacy. Otherwise, you'd have a third, fourth, fifth referendum. When would you stop? Which one would be authoritative? And it's very interesting listening to Sir John Curtis that there's very little evidence that people across the country have changed their minds.
He's the leading pollster and cephalogist, just to remind everybody, from the University of Strathclyde.
Yes, most distinguished figure. I once made the mistake of disagreeing with him, and I was wrong, not Sir John Curtis.
And his take is what?
His take is that broadly the decision of people hasn't changed, and the only change in polling comes from differentials in proposed turnout.
Right. OK. Lloyd, thank you. Samina is in Tooting. Samina, you're on the radio. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Jacob, do you think it's right and proper for Theresa May to bring back the same vote to Parliament for the third time? Isn't she just simply abusing parliamentary processes and procedures to try and force through her deal? And isn't this tactic explicitly barred to stop the government bullying the legislature? Shouldn't it be ruled out of order because it's the same in substance to a question that's been decided? And why are you urging the Speaker to rule it out? Third, fourth, fifth vote, when would we stop?
Samina, that's a brilliant question. I think you'll find this is on page 397 of Erskine May from memory, that the same question ought not to be put twice in a session. The issue is whether there have been any changes that make the premise of the question different. And I think between the first vote and the second vote, there had been some changes which legitimised it. If there are no changes at all, it would be very difficult, though you could, I suppose, argue there would change circumstances, that if people voted against it on the basis we would leave on the 29th of March, and now they're being offered it on the basis that we might never leave, that is arguably a sufficiently changed circumstance.
Quick response from you, Samina.
Well, it's interesting that there can't be a second referendum yet. There can be a third, fourth and fifth vote in this. And you talk about changed circumstances, yet there's been 3 years since the referendum. There's the change in the country, the circumstances have been massive. I just think Parliament politicians are just cynical and use votes when they want to and when they don't want to, just for their convenience.
Well, the government has a policy that it wants to get through. It's doing everything it can to get it through. And it is trying in its way to deliver on the referendum result. I don't think it's trying in the right way. but things may change. So I think the issue is not the same as the referendum, because this is carrying out the mandate of the referendum, which was then confirmed in a general election. It's important to remember there were 3 elections around the referendum: 2015 when Cameron promised it, 2016 when it took place, and 2017 when there was another general election when both parties backed leaving. So I think the democratic mandate for leaving is remarkably strong.
Thank you for that, Selina. Ray mentioned a couple of the newspapers. Writing in the Daily Telegraph today, Boris Johnson suggests that Theresa May needs to go back to Brussels to seek, and I quote, real change. Is he right?
Well, there is a council this week on the 21st, on Thursday. I think that would be an opportunity to say to them, look, you don't want the backstop, we don't want the backstop, let's put an end date in. I think that would be a good thing to do. I think it would be good for the Prime Minister to stand up and say, and in the next stage of negotiations, the negotiating team will be X, Y, and Z rather than A, B, and C, to make it clear that there will be
Who
real
should X,
change.
Y, and Z be? Who would you field?
Well, various people. Crawford Faulkner is much respected as a trade negotiator, and this would basically be a trade negotiation as a civil servant, and perhaps to do as we did when we joined, to have a minister resident in Brussels rather than ministers hopping back and forth, because this is essentially a political decision rather than a civil service administrative decision.
And does the current Prime Minister stay in post for this?
You may remember that I was involved in a vote of no confidence against the Prime Minister at the end of last year. I'm therefore not going to...
But if she were to set out terms for her, orderly terms for her departure, some people talk about at your party conference later this year a new leader is appointed. What impact might that have, Mr. Rees Mogg?
It's one of the very few occasions when I'm going to avoid your question, because I feel that having been involved in the vote of no confidence last time, if I get involved in the leadership question now, it just appears to be sour grapes. So I'm going to leave those discussions to other people.
And just lastly, we talk. So if you say there is some merit to what Boris Johnson suggests, does that mean that this vote MV3 shouldn't take place at all now then? There's an argument just to sideline it?
Well, there's talk of it taking place after the council rather than before, and that may be sensible because we will then know where we are, and it gives the government time. The other thing I think is really important, would be influential in my vote, is if the Wabe bill, the implementing bill, is passed, so that we know how this would stand in UK law and what our options would be afterwards. Because this is a rotten deal. If this deal goes through, we will need to change it. But therefore we will need to keep our options open in the Wabe bill to be able to do that legally under UK law.
And lastly, isn't it fair to say that Brexit is a process, not an event?
That's such an interesting thing you say, because I think I mistakenly thought it was an event, and you are right, as so often. It is a process. That it's a process, and you see this really, and I should have realised it earlier, that 2015 is the start of the process in terms of the referendum, though there's a 30-year build-up of us getting increasingly disillusioned with what's going on in Brussels. Then the referendum result, then Article 50, then the negotiations on how we leave, then the negotiations on our new relationship. And that's why I said to Mark at the beginning that if it is Mrs. May's deal or staying, Mrs. May's deal is fundamental, because in this process we are legally out, and the whole basis for our future relationship with the European Union is different. And therefore those who are saying it's better to remain in the European Union than to take a bad deal, I think are missing a golden constitutional opportunity.
Let's go back to the calls. We're back to Lewisham. Dan, you're on the radio. Good morning, Dan.
Hi, good morning. Hi,
good morning, Dan.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. My topic is just based on the no-deal Brexit. Mr. Rees Mogg, you made comments in the past regarding the British public will have to probably suffer a little bit for the short term, but a no-deal Brexit would be beneficial in the long term. And my question to you is, when we've had so many business owners, CEOs, tell us that a no-deal Brexit is going to be completely disastrous for our country, do you still stand by the fact that that will be the case? And also, why should the average working man have to suffer for any kind of short term when it's been alleged that you actually made money off of this Brexit campaign?
Sorry, what was that last point?
You've made money.
Oh, well, that's nonsense. You've been listening to the Channel 4, which told a whole lot of rubbish last week. I have made no money out of Brexit at all. It's made no difference to my financial circumstances.
I thought there was relocating of some of your company offices to Dublin.
Which is not true either. We have
I'm sorry. Okay.
we have a fund in Dublin,
Right.
But we've got a fund in New Zealand. I mean, we are a global business investing in emerging markets.
So you Jacob Rees Mogg Incorporated has not been made a penny or a cent wealthy.
Brexit has made no difference
Just
to
to
my financial situation.
Now, so what Dan's key point is, well, of course, what it's done for the rest of us, for all of us in the UK.
And that's the issue on leaving without a deal. What I've said is not quite how you've reported it, Dan. What I've said is there may be some things that people haven't thought about that are briefly problematic. I don't expect it to be difficult for the economy. In fact, I expect it to be an opportunity. And the representatives of business who complain about it are the CBI, who have a track record, the EU-funded CBI, who have a wonderful track record of getting everything wrong. They wanted to join the Euro, they were in favour of the ERM, and they claim a membership of 180,000, which is very interesting. Because when you look at that, they include all the members of associated bodies. So they include the members of the National Farmers Union and the members of the Country Landowners Association. When you add those two together, a third of their members are farmers and landowners. They're not representing British business.
Thank you for that, Dan. Shahi in Redbridge. You're on the radio, Shahi. Go ahead.
Morning, Jacob.
Good morning.
That's a question. As the DUP have had the deciding vote for a number of years now with the Conservative Party, would you consider joining the Brexit Party for the same kind of reason? At the moment, I've been a Conservative voter for many years, and I cannot vote for Mrs May and the Conservative Party as it stands at the moment. We have been let down very badly on the whole Brexit situation, how it was negotiated in very badly. Now, if you and a number of the members of the ERG were to join the Brexit Party as a tactical decision, just to get Brexit back up and running again if they have a further extension, would that be something that you would consider?
No, it wouldn't. I'm a Conservative and I will remain in the Conservative Party. But also, it wouldn't work that if you look at the voting strength last week, the 188 Conservatives voted not to delay Brexit, 202 MPs altogether. It was 1/3 to 2/3. If the Brexiteers were to form themselves into a coalition partner of Theresa May, all that we would do is force her to find her votes elsewhere or find that the Conservatives were no longer in government. It wouldn't solve any problems and it would make Brexit weaker rather than stronger.
Shahi, thank you. We move to other matters. Resh in Ealing. You're through to Jacob Rees Mogg. Go ahead, Resh.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Morning, Resh.
Thanks for taking my call. Over the weekend, a mother said on CNN that her son had told her, "Don't worry," in light of the recent terrorist attacks and in the UK stabbings.
You're referring to the attack on the mosques in New Zealand and a spike in what is deemed by some police authorities to be hate crime over the weekend in the UK.
Yes, that's
On
right.
you go, Resh. Yep.
Yeah. So this mother was saying, just as a quick example, she was crying because her son said to her, "Don't worry, Mom, I won't tell anyone I'm Muslim," which really resonated with me.
And where was this? Sorry. Is this in the US or?
It was in the US, but
okay.
It's a global issue.
No, I get that. What's your question to Mr. Rees Mogg, particularly as regards UK, Resh?
Yes. Tailing on from that sort of fear of being Muslim,
Sure.
I wondered, with the recent Islamophobic attacks in mind, and your tweet, which you had tweeted stating Islamophobes have no place in the Tory party, where 14 party members were expelled, would you be able to show leadership on the issue by answering the Muslim Council of Britain's repeated calls, supported by Baroness Saeed Awarsi and over 350 mosques across the UK, for an independent inquiry into the numerous other examples of conservative Islamophobia?
Well, the tragedy in New Zealand is so dreadful, and of course being New Zealand makes it worse because people thought New Zealand was such a safe country. Such an attack on Western civilization by a very evil person. And I think what you're saying about the young man who felt he couldn't admit to his faith, that is the sort of thing that ought to have no place in a civilized society. People ought to be free to worship in whatever way they choose. I think in terms of the Conservative Party has acted strongly when Islamophobia has appeared, when people have said things about Muslims that are wrong. They have been removed from the party. So I don't think there's the sufficient evidence. I don't think just because terrible things are going on the Conservative Party should automatically say, well, we must have an inquiry. I think we've been good at rooting out these things when they happen, and that is absolutely right and proper, and that people in this country of whatever faith ought to feel safe, and that we ought to have genuine religious tolerance, which I think is under threat.
You said that New Zealand was an example of Western civilization. You know where it is?
Oh, I know where it is.
Yes.
But if you think that most of the population...
It's the principles of it.
And it's the principles of it, and that the...
But many would argue the reason it was chosen is because of that.
Because it was so safe,
and
yes.
it's almost like an ideal...
Yes. But I do know it's Antipodean.
Yes,
I'm not
indeed.
that stupid.
But that was why, because it is such a glaring beacon, if you will, of tolerance, that's made it possibly an easy hit for this Australian man. He still has to, of course, go through the process, but that's what it seems to be.
Yeah, I suppose one must assume the principle of innocent until proved guilty, even under these circumstances.
Yes.
But assuming it is the Australian who has been arrested, yes.
Resh, thank you. On to stay with Stephen in Dartford. Stephen, you're through to Jacob Rees Mogg. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Stephen.
Yes. Good morning.
The first time I'm calling you, Nick, I phoned for the first time I phoned on Friday to speak to James O'Brien in light of what happened in Christchurch.
Okay. Well, if I can move you to your question to Jacob Rees Mogg, because James will be with us in 31 minutes' time. So Go ahead. Thank you,
Mr. Rees Mogg. With the whole of the whole Brexit campaign is so far at the forefront of the whole of the UK. Are we really missing the ball as to what's happening globally with regards to the way we are dealing with the threat of Muslims? Are we really missing are we dropping the ball so massively?
What do you mean dropping the ball in a sentence, Stephen? What do you mean?
I reflected back to Friday. I mean, there was a notion that what the atrocity that happened on Friday is no different in any other respect to any other terrorist atrocity in the world. But it was the far right sort of tourists, I'll call them, who have the means of a smartphone and a keyboard, where they can dip their toe into the world of extremist views, and then sort of, without any consequence, remove themselves from it and go back to the normal day-to-day.
This is the impact of social media and whether social media is doing enough. Jacob Rees Mogg.
Stephen, I think you make a very valid point. I think that social media must bear some responsibility for what appears on its sites. It's always struck me that they have these amazing abilities to target an advert that highlights your latest interest and passing thought, but they are unable, so they say, to stop vile information, whether it's paedophile information, extremist, terrorist information, appearing on their systems. I'm afraid I don't believe them. I think this is part of their way of getting customers, and that they should be held to account and that laws should hold them to account. They are essentially publishers. If a correspondent comes on, a caller comes on LBC and says things that are in breach of the law, LBC has some responsibility. Even if the caller comes on and gets through by accident and has told lies and all sorts of things, LBC still has some responsibility. If people put violent information or pornographic information on Facebook, Facebook can wipe its hands.
Talking of responsibility, just while I've got you for the last minute or so, there was a drop on Friday of the takings of Comic Relief, which currently is somewhere around £8 million below where it was last time out. Some people are attributing that to David Lammy and his rather intemperate remarks about colonialism, poverty, porn and other matters. Is David Lammy partly to blame? Jacob Rees Mogg?
No. I don't think he is. I think David Lammy is an important political figure, but I don't think that people giving to Comic Relief would have taken that much notice of what he said.
Even though you're supporting the trope of the white saviour?
No, I don't think it made any difference to most people. I think most people wouldn't have heard of it. I just don't think it's at all likely. I think Comic Relief has peaked in the course of nature, that it was something that was very exciting and new and novel, and now it's a little bit old hat, and I think...
Not that you'd know anything about old hat.
Well, I quite like old hats, but I'm not a great hat wearer, as it happens. So no, I don't think it's David Lammy. I think that Comic Relief has, in the course of nature, peaked, and they need to make it slightly more interesting and comic and find new things to do, and just plonking on a red nose is no longer very funny.
Lastly, sitting in that very chair last week, Boris Johnson was asked about the wisdom of spending police funds in certain ways, and he used the expression spaffing money up the wall. I didn't know what spaffing meant. Jacob Rees Mogg, do you know what it means, and would you use such a word?
It's not a word that's in my vocabulary, so I can't help you, I'm afraid.
You don't know it either?
No, I don't know it.
No, I won't tell you, but I will tell you after the news, because it's truly shocking. And it was chosen by Boris Johnson, and I wondered whether you knew.
No, it's not a word I know.
Lastly, what happens March 29?
With a bit of luck, we leave without any deal, and the country prospers from then on. It would be a marvellous liberation. The Prime Minister doesn't want that, but I think the British people do. It would be fantastic if that's where we could get. But that is a hope rather than a prediction.
Conservative Jacob Rees Mogg chairs the ERG, appearing on LBC when news is next.
Jacob Rees Mogg has signalled on LBC he'd be prepared to back Theresa May's Brexit deal, saying it would be better than remaining in the EU. But the Tory Brexiteer and ERG chairman says he's waiting to see what the DUP